Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, potential sanctions. The UN meets today to vote on sanctions against the DPRK. What will it mean for the world? And the developing world, we take a look at China's economic and diplomatic ties with nations on the rise. The United Nations is voting on a resolution to impose what will be the toughest sanctions against the DPRK in 2 decades in response to the country's nuclear program. The vote was initially planned for Tuesday but was delayed as Russia's request for more time to review the proposed sanctions. China said it will abide by the contents of the sanction, a departure from its previous stance toward the country, many say. We will be discussing these issues with our panel today, but first, take a look at this.
An unknown future. A UN Security Council vote on the toughest DPRK sanctions to date was postponed earlier this week. This was at Russia's request, after it invoked a procedural 24-hour review of the resolution. The sanctions have been negotiated over 7 weeks of discussions between the US and China, and include mandatory inspections of cargo leaving and entering North Korea by sea or air, and halts imports of all products that could be used for military purposes. The resolution also bans imports to North Korea of aviation and rocket fuel, as well as exports of commodities such as coal, iron, and gold. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Hong Lei said that China will abide by the decision.
It's necessary for the UN Security Council to adopt a resolution that can curb the DPRK's nuclear and missile capability. China is willing to communicate on and discuss the issue with other nations. If the sanction resolution is approved, China will abide by the contents of the resolution.
However, the DPRK said it will not be affected by the sanctions.
Whether or not such resolutions are to be put to a vote will be none of our business, and we will never ever be bound by them.
The DPRK's early February rocket launch and nuclear tests have been greeted by global condemnation. Washington and Seoul are planning to implement a missile defense system called THAAD in South Korea. But China thinks the THAAD radar system extends far beyond the DPRK's borders into China and therefore is a security issue for China.
We, China, have an opposing stance on the deployment of the THAAD in South Korea, implemented by the US and South Korea. We have clarified China's position in terms of this issue, and we hope that the US and South Korea can seriously consider China's concern and deal with the issue in a reasonable way.
With the implementation of these tough sanctions, it remains to be seen whether Kim Jong-un can be swayed or will only further isolate his country.
For more on the sanctions against DPRK by the international community, likely to be there at the UN on Wednesday morning, we are having in our studio here in Beijing Mr. Yang Shiyu, who is from the China Institute of International Studies. Mr. Yang has been doing research about DPRK nuclear issue for quite a few years, I have to say. You experienced all the ups and downs. And also joining us from Washington, D.C., we're having Ms. Sharon Squassoni, who is the Director of Proliferation Prevention Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Welcome as well, Mrs. Squassoni. First of all, we talk about sanctions, and many talk about the significance of the sanctions. We have to take a look at exactly what these sanctions are. We talk about the exports of natural resources being banned, international banking activities being banned, and most importantly, that is the shipping in and out toward DPRK will be checked by relevant governments. Yep. What would that mean, Mr. Yang?
Well, first of all, it's an effective measure to prevent North Korea from smuggling dual-use goods for their nuclear and missile programs by the inspection for all cargoes, both in and out of the North Korea, and also smuggling to proliferation. So, but the side product is that will make foreign trade in North Korea in a more difficult situation, and increase the risks for North Korean trading partners. So that's a mixed effects
Right.
made by the
But the
measure.
most important question is whether the sanction is likely to work. It's going to serve the purpose of prevent DPRK of going further on the so-called nuclear weapon cause it has already sought. I mean, Squassoni, what do you make of the possible effectiveness of this sanction, the new round?
Well, sanctions can never totally prevent a country from pursuing weapons of mass destruction programs. But what they can do is make it more difficult and more costly. And your other guest is absolutely right. North Korea has used shipping to a great degree as a kind of a shell game. A lot of entities, a lot of flag swapping on these ships so that they can hide shipments. And so I think a strengthening of that, and also China's willingness to actually inspect cargo might help. Will it solve the problem? No. Kim Jong-un is absolutely committed to pursuing his nuclear and ballistic missile programs.
Right. And now we're also joined by Ms. Catherine Moon, who is a senior fellow from the Center for East Asia Policy Studies at the Brookings Institution. Welcome to you as well, Ms. Moon. Of course, your ancestors are originally coming from South Korea, and you are an American citizen. So let me ask you about this. South Korea Foreign Minister talked about today for even further actions against the DPRK. Is this round of sanctions, you think, satisfying to a certain extent? What do you make, from your perspective, about the effectiveness of it, possibly?
Well, I think we have to think about sanctions on various levels. One is, of course, to slow down, if not stop, the nuclear and missile development of the DPRK. But sanctions also serve a diplomatic function. And for South Korea, I think, getting China and the United States to work together to support South Korea's very strong stance against the DPRK is a diplomatic win. So I think from Seoul's perspective, strong sanctions coming out of the UNSC, Security Council, will be seen as a diplomatic win for South Korea vis-a-vis China as well as the United States.
The sanction that we talked about is going to be voted on. We still do not know whether it will be passed, even though it is very likely to be. But it was delayed by a request coming from Moscow, suggesting wanting to read more about the content of the sanctions. Having said that, though, Mr. Yang, China and Russia, for years, have been opposing sharp sanctions against the DPRK, mainly worrying about something so-called faithfully weakening the regime, which will cause eventually many consequences. But why this time? Why the change of heart? Are the two countries going to make sure the balance is done, that is not going to faithfully weaken the regime, while at the same time punish what they have done?
Well, you're touching a very sensitive question.
So I have to throw it to you, sir.
Okay. Yes, you're right. The draft has been, in my view, a relatively balanced. And why Russia focus on more on details for review or even for revision, I don't know whether or not they will make a revision, but it's highly possible. But the reason, I think, because of the two. Number one, it's a game between Russia and the United States. Remember, when we expect Russia to support the sanction proposed by the U.S., at the same time, Russia has been under sanctions posed by the United States and its allies. So it's difficult to imagine, say, for Moscow, on one hand, positively support the U.S.-led sanction, but meanwhile suffer from U.S.-led sanction either.
Yeah, well, that's for Russia, but what about China? What is the change of heart that has led China to this time quite agreeably go with every country, at least looking from afar, observing China, on the sanctions? Is that a click or a change of heart, Mr. Yang?
Well,
many of them wonder from outside this country.
Okay, let me put it this way. Russians' review or postpone was not designed to target at China, but target at the United States. although they will certainly support and vote for the sanction measures. So basically, that's not a problem between Moscow and Beijing, but a problem between Washington and Moscow.
Right.
Yeah.
But what about China?
Well, I would say China hope, firstly, Russia should positively support and abide by the resolution, all measures by the resolution. And secondly, the revisions should not be too much, because too much revisions will trigger endless debates and the revisions
yes,
and the
indeed.
re-revisions.
We all know how the system works in the US.
Now, the most important thing is we definitely need a quick passage so that we can quickly launch the resolution through the
A
UNSC.
concerted effort with speaking with one voice, that's likely to be the message being sent to Pyongyang. Ms. Guasongli, though, what do you think, coming from Washington's perspective, looking at China this time, and will China and the United States being described as by some Western press saying both working together to design this sanction? Is that a very clear description, a correct description of this round of diplomatic interactions?
I think only the diplomats sitting in the room discussing the details of those sanctions are able to say that. I mean, clearly,
this
from
is
the
a very
outside,
smart answer you
it's
give.
positive. Well, you know, one never knows, right? I mean, there are private conversations that, you know, even reporters don't hear about. But it's a very positive sign. You know, it could be that China wants to take the reins a little more. It could be that this, you know, suits China's purposes in, you know, sends a message to North Korea. It could also be that China has simply just lost patience, that several of the initiatives that it's taken over the last year towards Kim Jong-un have fallen flat on their face. And, you know, this is a final sort of message to the DPRK that, you know, we've lost patience, you know, and this is the result. So you need to get in line.
Ms. Moon, having said that, though, what about the other side?
Yes.
You've been an observer of the Korean Peninsula for long. What about the DPRK's possible reactions? Have countries working on the sanctions worked into their minds what might be the possible result? Will that push DPRK further down the road it's already sought?
Very, very pertinent question. But let me first get to your question that the other two guests were much more diplomatic about in terms of why China seems to be cooperating with the United States. I think it's very important. And you're right to push us to think about it. The Chinese government in the last 2 weeks has been very active. Wu Dawei, Mr. Wu, has been going to Korea for a 5-day visit. That is a long visit, to talk with various members of the South Korean government to try to get back the Chinese-South Korean relationship on a better track. South Korea was very disappointed in the initial responses that came out of Beijing, not being willing to push DPRK harder after January and February tests. But I think the recent diplomatic engagements initiatives by the Chinese to go to Seoul, and then Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to Washington, meeting with Secretary of State Kerry, I think these were very, very important diplomatic messages, not only to Pyongyang, but to East Asia, to the UN, to Russia, to the rest of the world, that the US and the Chinese, the Americans and Chinese, do have a very important shared interest in peace and stability on the peninsula, but also in the region. And we know that the US and China have tensions over South China Seas, etc. But I think the two countries are trying to find pockets, areas where cooperation can take place, and this is a good sign. Of course, in diplomacy, nothing is forever, but I hope the momentum will be there. There's also the fact that the Chinese have been very upset about the possibility of South Korea adopting the U.S. missile defense system, THAAD. And what is really important is that the U.S. and the South Koreans have been willing to send clear signals that if China will help and cooperate with the UN sanctions against the DPRK, that there is no need to rush into any kind of a THAAD deal between the U.S. and the ROK.
What about the question?
Do you want me to talk about DPRK?
Certainly. What about what if
in terms of
have sides, all sides working on this sanction, ever thought about possibility of strong reactions going exactly the direction that no country hopes from the DPRK as a result?
Well, of course, that is a real possibility, and sanctions are a gamble. But I think this time around, the sanctions out of the UN Security Council are particularly important because the U.S. and China seem to be working very much hand in hand, at least for the time being. So North Korea has to think hard. Does it want to defy both China and the United States together? And also, the fact is that so much of the materials and the financial, the funding for its nuclear missile development have been funneled through the Chinese-North Korean border. And so if that border is controlled more tightly, and if the surrounding seas are controlled more tightly, there is a chance that North Koreans will realize they will have to weigh the costs and the benefits, both economically of pursuing the program and diplomatically.
I see.
I also want to mention here, China is not the only country. I know that many people look at China as the problem in terms of the sanctions holding. But we have countries in Africa that do active business hiring North Koreans to train police and security military in Uganda, Zimbabwe, etc., buying cheap military equipment from the North Koreans. So in some places in the world, we need to help train the countries to actually help enforce the sanctions.
Right. Okay, let me quickly go to the other two guests. We only have a few minutes left. Mr. Yang, you want to respond to what Ms. Moon talked about, so-called China's starting point this time in the sanctions, working with others. And secondly, there are a lot of myths about DPRK and how they work with different countries. We do not necessarily know all the answers to this. There might be different versions, but the question is, has China anticipated what if after this round of sanctions? What would that mean for China's relations with DPRK?
Well, with the new resolution, China will increase measures on DPRK. I said increase, not a starting point, because we have adopted long-time sanctions against DPRK, especially from the 2013. It's a long list. We call it a blacklist against North Koreans importing. And this resolution will add more measures from Chinese government, the Chinese communists, and police forces. But as to your point, say, what would be the reaction from the North Korea? It's always difficult to guess. However, their slogan can be the glue for the answer. Say, stronger reaction against strong action. That is a political slogan and habit. So certainly there was some strong action or stronger reaction from Pyongyang. However, all options for strong reaction will be limited from some military drills or alert of war or some even more tests. That's it. I don't believe there will be a real shooting against the other and launching a war. I don't think so.
We'll see what's going to happen. Mrs. Guasoni, what about you? Do we know what's likely to happen? Are we prepared? What could be happening?
Well, one of the issues right now that the Russians and others have been talking about is this export of aviation fuel. And so whether North Korean planes can refuel in countries such as China and Russia. So, you know, if you had a complete cutoff, you could really increase the isolation very significantly. I think they're stepping back from that a little bit. I think they're going to allow the airplanes at least to refuel outside. I'm a little, you know, I don't think we're there yet on the point of collapse for the DPRK. I think we've been we've been heralding that for many, many years. But I also wanted to underscore one of the points that Ms. Moon made on the effectiveness of sanctions. You know, it's not only China, and that other countries around the world have been facilitating this regime's trade. You know, a panel of experts at the UN recently gave a report, and they said only 36 countries out of 190 had actually reported on their implementation of sanctions. So one positive thing, actually, with such a strong Chinese support for sanctions could be these other countries seeing that, well, yeah, there is unity within the P5, maybe Russia notwithstanding, and
I see.
And you know, some concerted efforts to train these countries, to get them to report, to stop their trade with North Korea could actually be pretty beneficial.
Well, we hope there will be some peaceful reactions coming from the other side, and also eventually there can be better result for peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula. That's going to be possible for everybody. Thank you so much for the very seasoned voices coming from 3 experts working on the DPRK nuclear issue for a very long time. Thank you so much, Sharon Squassony, Catherine Moon, and Yang Xiyu. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Stay with us here. On World Insight, we got our final segment coming right up. The developing world, we take a look at China's economic and diplomatic ties with nations on the rise. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight, and now we continue our series of discussions on China's diplomacy, China's global vision. Today, we will talk about China's relations with developing countries aspirations for equality in international affairs, multipolarization, and the democratization of international relations are growing increasingly strong. As the world's largest developing country, China is proactively prioritizing its cooperation with developing countries to improve their international position.
A community with common goals. During the past years, China's rapidly growing presence in developing countries has become a topic for debate in the international media and among economists and policy analysts. Of particular interest are China's ties with Pakistan and African countries. China, the world's largest developing country, and Africa, a continent with the most developing countries, are natural partners in pursuing common development. From 2013 to 2015, Chinese President Xi Jinping visited a wide range of countries across Africa. At the summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, President Xi announced that China will offer $60 billion of funding support and roll out 10 major plans to boost cooperation with Africa in the coming 3 years.
China-Africa relations have today reached a stage of growth unmatched in history. We should scale the heights, look afar, and take bold steps.
President Xi's Pakistan visit in April of last year was his first cross-border visit in 2015, as well as the first visit to the country made by a sitting Chinese president in the past 9 years. The visit lasted 28 hours and consisted of 18 events. China's Belt and Road Initiative has the potential for far-reaching impact. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a flagship project, will play a major role in transforming Pakistan and the surrounding region. Various developing nations have expressed their support for strengthening South-South cooperation. Xi's speech to the general debate of the UN General Assembly aimed to demonstrate China's commitment to promoting South-South cooperation.
China will continue to stand together with developing countries. We firmly support greater representation of developing countries, especially African countries, in the international governance system.
China has stressed its desire to integrate the interests of the Chinese people with people of other countries, providing assistance to other developing countries within the framework of South-South cooperation, to reduce poverty and improve livelihoods. The country has also proactively promoted international development and cooperation, with an aim to play a constructive role in this aspect.
And for more on China's relations with developing countries and what China has in mind when it comes to providing more support for these countries, we're joined here in the Beijing studio, Mr. Zhang Jianping, who is the director of the International Economic Cooperation Department under the National Development and Reform Commission here in China. Welcome, sir. Also joining us from Islamabad in Pakistan, we have Ambassador Masood Khan, who is the Director General of the Institute of Strategic Studies in Pakistan. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador. Meanwhile, joining us as well, we have in Nairobi, Professor Macharia Munene, who is a Professor of History and International Relations at the United States International University. Gentlemen, welcome to the three of you. First of all, maybe we can talk a little bit about what's going on between China and Pakistan. Ambassador Khan, 46 billion US dollars. That's a huge number. And that has been China's plan to support the economic interactions between China and Pakistan. What do you make of this number? And will Pakistan be able to deliver its part of the responsibilities?
Well, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor has been called a game changer or a fate changer for Pakistan and also for the region. It's a monumental project. I mean, if you want to compare the injection of $46 billion to the GDP, Pakistan GDP, it's a huge investment that China has made in Pakistan. It also expresses and underlines China's confidence in Pakistan's economy and Pakistan's constructive role in moving the region towards peace and stability. So I think that when President Xi Jinping was here last year, he made this historic announcement, and it was well received by the parliament, by the people of Pakistan, by the government of Pakistan. And in fact, very few people know that many of the projects, early harvest projects, are underway and they're being implemented. And once they are completed in the sectors of energy or industry or infrastructure or the Gwadar port itself, then of course there would be huge transformation here in Pakistan. But this project will not just benefit Pakistan or China, but it would act as a catalyst in promoting connectivity between multiple regions, East Asia, West Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East. Well, so it's truly transformative.
Mr. Zhang, though, that is on the condition that Pakistan and the region could be more stable. When you have infrastructure building, when you have economic growth, that's what is needed. And meanwhile, at the time China was committed to the 46 billion US dollars, it was an economy of the world that was less challenged as what it is today. So what do you make of this historic number, as Mr. Ambassador earlier illustrated? And will that be the crystallization also suggested by Mr. Ambassador? Is going to be repeatable or not, a model?
Yes, actually, 46 billion US dollars. This number make a lot of other economies, feel jealous a little bit. Also, that China's Silk Road Fund already, implemented the first project, which is located in, Pakistan for energy project. So actually, China-Pakistan economic corridor is one of the 6 economic corridors according to China's ambitious, the Belt and Road Initiative. In that process, I think that from Chinese side, we will provide not only capital, but also, maybe China's, design, project design capacity and equipment supply, as well as our, equipment maintenance and railway construction, road construction, something like that. Especially energy, power supply. In Pakistan, the lack of electricity, lack of power means that its development will face with bottleneck.
Right.
And then I think that the next step, our support and Pakistan efforts make together, and we can promote these corridors successfully.
Right. Well, that is an interesting example about China's BNR, the Belt and Road Initiatives, as they say. But Professor Munene, coming from Nairobi in Kenya, we understand things are different in Africa, because China and Africa having enjoyed traditional friendship. China has been a big supporter for Africa's construction and nation building over decades. But countries are getting ever more pragmatic. It is common interest that are bringing people and countries together. Professor Munene, what do you think the rising continent of Africa, what would be the best options for Africa to work with China? When China is getting ever more popular because of its size of its economy and its global influence, how Africa position itself vis-a-vis China's vision for the future?
Well, the African countries are looking carefully at the way China does its things, how it has risen to be the powerful country and influential country that it is. African countries note that China brings to the field a fresh approach to dealing with African countries. And then the African countries reciprocate that by also showing commitment and willingness to discuss matters on basis of mutuality and respect, and from there they can move forward. The further China appears to deliver on what it promises goes a long way towards instilling confidence in the African community towards China. And you mentioned that the Africans and China have had long relations, particularly on the political front during the colonial days, very supportive of that. And the Africans have also supported China in its own political endeavor. But more recently, we have this interaction on economic and development, particularly on the infrastructure field. And the benefits have been seen, and people are excited about it, and they would like to see more of it taking place.
Whether it's Belt and Road Initiative, Professor Zhang, or AIIB, or Silk Road Fund, all of these are new ideas inspired by others, or China came up with itself. But the thing is, when you are the second largest economy of the world, if you didn't do anything, people would say, well, this country is just not responsible for the world. If you are doing something, some people will be suspicious about your egos or ambitions, wondering whether you are threatening them or not. This is only natural. But the question is, how is China going to make that balance well? While on the same time, making sure it is really having effective interaction with the others. On the other hand, also make sure the balance of the world is not likely to be disturbed.
Actually, now not only on the platform of the Belt and Road Initiative, but also for other developing economies, especially those countries in Africa, in Latin America, due to lack of enough and qualified infrastructure, actually their development has a lot of problems. So I think that AIIB and the Silk Fund Road and BRICS banks, they will provide new approaches to in order to provide enough infrastructure for developing economies. Also, for AIIB operation, this year these banks started to operated, and also Silk Road Fund. In that process, for AIIB, its members are from different countries in the world, and all of countries, they can work together. They can have their rules and regulations, and they will discuss their standards, transparency issues.
Yes, indeed.
That means this bank will follow international trends and standards. Also, I think that in that process, China and other developing economies, including some of developed economies, we can work together. We can explore possible and appropriate approaches for developing economies.
Ambassador Khan, though, will infrastructure solve all the problems of your country? Is it a concern, some say, that you're putting so much effort on one kind of project while ignoring the others? What do you make of the effectiveness of these kind of cooperation we're talking about?
Well, I think it's the vision behind these initiatives that matters and that would drive the entire process. One Belt, One Road is about infrastructure, but it's also about related development in the industrial sector, also in the energy sector. So you look at infrastructure, and this is a critical infrastructure, critical economic infrastructure that we're talking about, is a super connector between the regions and between the continents. So it's truly cross-continental and cross-regional initiative that President Xi Jinping and the Chinese state has taken. The other thing that I want to say, I mean, you were talking to the professor from Nairobi. You know, China is not inward-looking now. It is investing in world peace and stability. For instance, in Africa, China is investing in both conflict resolution, because it is now contributing peacekeepers. It is also helping peacekeeping effort by the United Nations, and it's also directly investing in the development, economic development of Africa. Now, for Pakistan, I can tell you that Pakistan's corridor could be replicated in other regions. And the second thing is that we think that this injection of $46 billion is in fact the seed money, because when all these projects are completed, what you would see would be exponential growth in Pakistan and around Pakistan. It is going to be good news for extended and linked neighborhoods. So I think that, coming back to your question, it's not just roads and rail links or the airports or ports we are talking about. We're talking about human communities, and in your introduction you rightly mentioned the community of common destiny, because we have a shared destiny, and instead of going to war and confronting each other and fighting with each other, we would invest in collective development that the people of the world are empowered, people of Asia, Africa and Europe are empowered, made more prosperous, and they are interconnected.
Well, but Professor Munene, listening to the other two guests, I have to ask you this question as well. Previously, decades ago, the developing countries were very united politically because they have an ideological ideal among them, particularly when they were the really weaker party among all. However, developing countries, emerging economies are on the rise, even though emerging economies these days are not doing necessarily well, excluding China. But still, the issue is things are changing. Therefore, when you are poor brothers and sisters, people really united together. When people are getting ever richer, sometimes the unity could be a challenge because everyone has their own plans. So what do you make of the changes that is going on? What do you eventually believe could really hold the developing countries these days together, including China and your continent, of course?
Yeah, there is still an expectation that the third world, as it used to be called, will continue to have common interests, in the sense that they continue to suffer the same challenges. It's true that the dynamics, world economic dynamics have changed somehow, but the cultural pattern is still the same. The political ramifications and concerns are still the same. So they still have all these issues to worry about. What has changed is some of the third world countries have become more prosperous economically, but in terms of the cultural appendages and issues, they are still very similar, and they still have the same challenges to face, whether one is in one part of the continent or another continent. They still have that baggage to carry. And when it comes to international political matters, they have a lot of things in common. Those have not disappeared just because some countries are doing better economically than the others.
Let me ask you, every one of you, the final question. In order to be a well-respected country in the world, particularly for the developing economies, soft power is believed to be an extremely important factor. How can developing countries, in a group or individually, from your perspective, develop this kind of well-respected soft power? So developing countries is not just about economies, it is also on the rise when it comes to respect from the rest of the world. Let's have Ambassador Khan, very briefly. I'll give you, every one of you, 30 seconds or so. Sir, go ahead.
Yes, Simon, my answer to your question is that the developing countries have to build coalitions and multiple overlapping constituencies in economic, political and security spheres. And I think that the best way to do is to empower them, to develop them economically, so that they have the resources to connect with each other. This is one part. Second, I think that China is emerging as a catalyst in this effort, and we appreciate that, and I have seen it myself personally, yes, that this is an emerging trend.
All right, only 10 seconds left, unfortunately, for the other two gentlemen. Professor Munene, you go first. 10 seconds, one sentence.
Yeah, I think the main thing is to insist on independent decision making on what is of interest to the developing country or third world countries, and they stick to it and not allow anybody else to come and tell them what is in their interest.
Wow.
So political decisions must be focused, and they will develop the economy.
All right, Mr. Zhang, 10 seconds.
I just like to emphasize on education and training in order to improve, soft power. Secondly, I think that developing economies, we have to learn each other, and big countries can provide some of assistance and international aid, for developing for small and those poor countries.
Well, thank you for the brainstorming, gentlemen. Mr. Zhang Jianping, Ambassador Masood Khan, and also Professor Macharia Munene. Thank you, really appreciate it. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You will be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.